Imagine a cold, rainy night. In the alley behind a fancy restaurant, a barefoot boy in filthy, torn clothes is rummaging through a dumpster. That's Lucas, only 9 years old, with big eyes full of hunger and hope, looking for just a piece of bread, not just for himself, but also for the stray dog who's become his best friend. Suddenly, a deep voice startles Lucas. He freezes. A well-dressed, wealthy man looks at him, surprised and cold. Lucas tries to run. The bread falls in the mud. The dog barks. Will anyone finally help? Or is everything about to get even worse for this boy? And why does that moment unsettle that millionaire so deeply? What happens in the next few minutes has the power to change lives forever. Stay here with me, because what this businessman does next will move you to your core. For a moment, everything is silent, except for the heavy rain drumming against the asphalt and the trash cans. Wind blows ice cold between the walls of the fancy restaurant, sending stray plastic bags skittering from the bins, brushing lightly against Lucas's thin legs. He's there, behind the building, a spot nobody ever looks at, except those who really have to. Lucas clutches a piece of stale bread. Who can tell how long it's been there? Probably 2 or 3 days, battered by wind and rain and the scornful glances of rushing employees dumping out the trash. His little hand, black with grime, grips the bread with a certain respect. He glances around, always half expecting some security guard to show up yelling, like the last time. But tonight there's no one else, just him and friend. That's what he calls the dog, who seems to understand everything. The mutt wags his tail and sits beside him without complaint, looking at Lucas as if he truly believes everything will turn out all right, even though it's just another night when hunger outweighs sleep. Lucas says nothing, but there's a hint of joy in his eyes. He shows the bread to the dog as if it's a prize. You can almost see a smile at the corner of his mouth, the kind only a child manages, even when everything's gone wrong. Carefully, with cold, trembling hands and maybe a little fear, he breaks the bread in half, mindful not to lose a single crumb. He gives half to friend, who snaps it up and wags his tail harder, as if to say, I knew there'd be some left for me. Lucas watches the dog chew. He rolls the remaining piece of bread in his hand, running his thumb over the hardened crust. It's cold, tough, even a little moldy, but he puts a bit in his mouth and chews slowly, feeling more the ache in his stomach than any taste. Still, he gives thanks in silence and looks up, where not a single star is visible. Only heavy clouds, slit by streetlights far down the road, illuminating puddles and raindrops. His bare feet sting with cold. The ground is wet, a mix of rainwater and grime. He wiggles his toes, trying to warm them up, but soon gives up. There's nothing else he can do. He pulls his ragged jacket tighter, the one with no zipper left. You can see bones beneath clothes far too big for him. His cheeks are hollow, his gaze is deep, and yet, somewhere within, there's still a flicker of hope, that kind of hope no one teaches you, but you never lose. Now and then, Lucas closes his eyes just to feel the soft rain on his forehead. He breathes deep. The stench of garbage mixes with the whiff of expensive perfume that drifts from the restaurant whenever someone opens the back door. He imagines how beautiful it must be inside, all shiny chairs, clean napkins, people talking without hurry. He dreams of being a waiter, like the old man who always greets him, even if hurriedly. That would be a different life. But for now, all he has is friend and this stale bread. Lucas breaks off a little more crust, gives another bit to the dog, who licks his fingers. Lucas's hand shakes not just from cold, but from exhaustion. You can tell it's been a rough night. Maybe he hasn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Even so, the boy chooses to smile. He strokes the dog's head and whispers, as if sharing a secret, Tonight was a good night, huh, friend? We made it. The dog gets it, or at least seems to closes his eyes and rests his nose on Lucas's knee. Inside the restaurant, no one's watching. No one wonders about those on the outside. Just harsh lights shining on pricey plates and voices booming about business, as if the world of those on the sidewalk were another planet. Lucas hugs the dog closer. He sits on the cold ground, leaning against the brick wall. His teeth chatter. He hugs his knees as tight as he can for warmth. But pride keeps him from crying. He just gazes at the wide street, cars passing now and then, imagining his mother. Would she be proud that her son never bowed to anger or despair? You can see in his eyes how much he misses her, but hunger is more urgent. Even so, he whispers a prayer, not for himself, but for everyone without a mother or food, like him. No one taught him that kind of generosity. It came from inside and stuck, even after so much suffering. Soon after, Lucas hears a car pull up. He shrinks back, afraid of being chased away, but holds tight to the dog and his scrap of bread. His heart pounds, waiting to see what happens next. The night promises to be long. The rain hammered the asphalt, that constant noise that pierces everything, even people's thoughts. The black car's driver opened the door carefully, making sure his passenger's suit stayed dry. Out stepped Gustavo Lacerda, always impeccable, tonight in a dark gray suit, hair slicked a bit too perfectly for this ugly evening. He doesn't even look up at the sky, just straightens his tie and slams the door, splashing into a puddle with little patience. It's not a night for walking. A taxi honks far away, the street lights flicker off the restaurant's glass gate. But instead of going in the front as usual, Gustavo circles around, needing to take an important call away from the noisy dining room. He holds his phone, already running through numbers and contracts in his head, thinking about that big table waiting for him. Then a different noise, a soft scuffle beneath the rain and the swish of tires through puddles. His eyes, accustomed only to luxury and shine, catch something moving by the building's corner, out back. Instinctively, he freezes and sees a boy crouched, digging through the trash. Not a scene that belongs in his world. It clashes with the scent of expensive fragrance inside the restaurant. But there it is. Real. Lucas looks like a skinny shadow beneath the orange lamplight. What hair clings to his face, plastered to his eyebrows. His tiny feet are black from a whole day wandering the streets. Clothes stick to his body, a faded Avengers t-shirt, blue shorts so shredded they barely pass for clothes. Lucas doesn't even notice he's being watched. So intent is he on the piece of bread he fished from the dumpster, stale, crumbling, nothing pretty about it. Even so, the boy looks at that bread as if it's treasure. For a moment, Gustavo just stands there, taking in the scene. Something stirs in him. A tangle of anger, confusion, and discomfort crosses his chest. His face stays hard, brow furrowed. He inhales slowly and decides to act, the way people do when they always have to show authority. Hey! His voice booms out, sharp and unthinking, like someone who's just witnessed something unacceptable. Lucas jumps. The boy curls up, clutching the bread to his chest as if to protect a secret. His big eyes now search upward, meeting Gustavo's glare as if the entire world's gone still. The rain seems to fall harder in that instant. Drops run down Lucas's face, mixing with a look that's part terror, part shame. He says nothing, just stares and holds the bread, breathing deep. His small hands tremble, from the cold and maybe from fear of this well-dressed man before him. Gustavo steps forward 3 times, his shoes shining despite the water, and stops at a distance. He narrows his eyes, as if trying to make sense of what he's seeing. What are you doing there? Don't you know this is for garbage? Who let you back here, kid? The question hits heavy, careless. Lucas bites his already cracked lip and tries to speak, but just shakes his head, unsure if he should tell the truth or not. His chest tightens. The smell of good food from inside hurts more now, like it's invading his empty stomach just to remind him that another world exists inside those doors. Friend, the dog, wags his tail beneath the rain, keeping an eye on both humans. If he's scared, he doesn't show it. He just watches, ready to leap in case anything happens. Lucas opens his mouth but only manages a whisper. Sorry, sir. He drops his head lower, wishing he could disappear. His hands are filthy, stained from days of digging through leftovers. Time hangs in an awkward silence. Rain falls, wind cuts, and 2 worlds that almost never touch stare at each other in the gloom. Gustavo feels something different, something he doesn't immediately understand, a memory maybe, from tougher times, or just a pang of something that's long lain dormant. Still, he keeps his face locked tight, serious, even a bit angry, clinging to the composure of a man who solves everything with money or short orders. But now, facing a scrawny, soaked boy, none of that seems to work. Lucas steps back twice, stumbling over a bottle cap on the sidewalk but catching himself. The bread slips out of his hand and lands on the ground, scattering crumbs. He looks down at it, then up at the man, squeezing his eyes shut so as not to cry. He's desperate to run, disappear, but his cold, raw feet can't summon up the courage. Gustavo watches it all, silent. His expensive shoes are wet, the cold seeping through his suit. He realizes just how off balance he feels. Outwardly, he's still the man who owns everything, but inside, something is giving way. A restless old ache stirs, bringing up memories he'd rather keep buried. Even so, he says nothing to betray any concern. For now, there's only silence, interrupted now and then by the dog's bark or distant thunder. Time drags, like a bead of rain running down Lucas's chin. Gustavo starts to step closer, but stops. He knows any sudden move will make the child bolt. This boy who already seems shrunken before a world so impossibly huge. All that exists in that moment is the boy's anxious gaze, his empty hands, and a wealthy man who finally allows himself to feel a little of the pain that lives in his memory. He just doesn't know what he'll do with it. Right then, Lucas felt like his chest would burst. He barely noticed the traffic or the smell of pizza from the kitchen, just the hammering of his own heart. His hand shook, nearly tearing the garbage bag as he rummaged for a piece of bread, even soaked, still precious to someone who has nothing. When he heard the man's deep voice behind him, it felt like a rare fright, the kind that knocks the wind from your lungs. Lucas caught a glimpse of the businessman's expensive shoes in the puddle. The reflected restaurant lights glinted off the nearby car, but Lucas focused only on the man's stare, hard, suspicious, annoyed, just like every adult he's met on these bitter nights. It seemed no one ever asked him anything without raising their voice. Still, Lucas tried to pick up his pitiful bit of bread, pretending not to hear. It was a habit, almost a reflex. One hand ready, working fast, the other prepared to drop everything and run. But this time, his hand failed him. The plastic slipped out of his fingers, the bread tumbling straight into a muddy puddle that splashed his thin shin, already exposed through gaps in his shorts. The businessman spoke again, even more firmly. Lucas didn't catch the words. He felt cold sweat sliding down his spine. The rain-soaked shirt clung to his body. Now, shame burned deeper than fear. All he wanted was a scrap of food, and even that came with humiliation. He dropped everything, his hope of eating that night among it. Petrified, he looked at the stray dog, the mangy mutt always tagging along. Friend wagged his tail, looking up at the man as if to say, "Don't hurt him, please." But Lucas just yearned to vanish. His face flushed red, his eyes filled with tears. Suddenly, Lucas spun around, splashing water behind him. He ran without even thinking where, barefoot, feeling each rock, every shard of glass hiding in the muck. The rain hit colder, pounding his face like a slap. He stumbled, almost fell, but didn't stop. His stomach throbbed, burning like a boulder inside him. All he wanted was to escape the weight of that man's gaze. For a while, the only sound was Lucas's feet in dirty water and the man's voice calling, now less confident. Friend barked loudly, wagging his tail, not understanding the boy's urgency. The hardest part was looking back. Lucas never did. But tonight he risked a glance just to be sure he wasn't being followed. He saw Gustavo standing by the curb, his suit soaked, looking as if he didn't know whether to enter the restaurant or do something else. The cold now came from within, sharper than any chill wind. Shame gnawed at his ribs. Why did it have to be so hard just to ask for bread? To try not to steal, as he promised his mother before she left? He felt like screaming, but just sped up again. As he ducked into a dark alley, Friend followed, waterlogged head to furry tail tip. The dog tripped on a stone, stopped, shook himself off, and stared at the millionaire as if begging him to help or at least to understand. Gustavo stood there, unmoving, eyes on the soiled bread scattered in the street. Cars crept past that corner, and the cashier inside the restaurant looked out the window with contempt, like someone spotting trash they want nowhere near. For a moment, Tom stood still. Deep inside, Gustavo felt something strange, a grief, a fury at not knowing what to do, an old memory swirling with the rain. He raised his hand, almost to call out again, but no words came. The chill climbed his back, but it was different, a coldness for having seen something he didn't want to forget. Lucas huddled up nearby, panting, struggling to calm down. He hugged his knees to his chest for warmth. His stomach growled loud. Friend rested his head on Lucas's arm, licking his face as if to comfort him. The boy offered a weak smile, thankful only not to be alone. He always promised the dog, "One day we'll walk into that restaurant through the front door." In that moment, it seemed impossible. The rain hammered down harder, puddles growing, cars splashing water onto the sidewalk. The garbage stank worse with everything soaked. Still, Lucas closed his eyes a moment, trying to remember his mom. The way she'd tell him that honesty is what makes a person great, even with nothing, even with shame. Meanwhile, Gustavo still stood frozen, a pang in his chest. The dog barking, Lucas's eyes, it was like someone had opened a door inside him. The businessman had never liked to feel vulnerable. But out there in the rain, he couldn't move. He just stared down the dark alley, those tiny footprints in the water, and felt a need to do something, even without knowing what. The restaurant stayed behind, its lights and the smell of food only deepening the loneliness of those on the outside. And Lucas, far away now, thought, just one more night, just hold out until morning. But underneath it all, soaked and hurting, he still wanted to be seen, not just himself, but the dog too. He wanted to be noticed without being treated as a problem. And on this rainy night, When everything seemed to be ending the way it always did, there was something different in the eyes of the rich man across the street. Lucas couldn't see it, but he felt a chill, like right at that very moment something was about to change. Even without quite believing it, he let hope stay awake, at least until the cold fell asleep. The restaurant door was right there, gleaming and lined with mirrors, but Gustavo couldn't lift his foot to go through. He remained under the awning, his hands still damp from the rain, bunched in his pocket. Outside, city noises were muffled, horns, tires on water, that damp night sound that feels like it'll never end. The glass reflected his distorted image, streaked with rain. But for a moment, it was as if he saw someone else entirely, a small boy, skinny legs, dark hair matted to his forehead, barefoot in the mud. The face wasn't really the one he wore now. More like his own face, from a time hardly anyone remembered. He shut his eyes, breathing deep. The feeling was strange, heavy, like someone had hung a wet blanket over his shoulders. It wasn't just guilt, it was more. A buried memory, a longing tucked away. From long ago, before expensive suits or signing contracts, before seeing his name in the news. Out front, the rain battered the bins, the street, the plants. And Gustavo found himself remembering a time he too ran for cover from storms, when every downpour felt like a challenge and cold seeped straight through to the bone. Nights when he dreamed of bread. Just bread, warm and fragrant. He starved and knew asking was wrong, but sometimes there was no other choice. He'd root through trash too, eyeing other boys enviously if they had even a piece of rotten fruit. Lucas's face, frightened but hopeful, haunted Gustavo's mind. He could picture the boy diving for the trash, moving quick because he knew he shouldn't, but wanting something so badly that fear just wasn't enough to stop him. And when he shouted, not spoke but shouted, he saw the shock ripple through the boy, his wide eyes, his desperate escape, bare, battered feet thumping the soggy ground. A knot rose in Gustavo's throat. He stood there, guilt flooding him for yelling, as if he'd been yelling at his own younger self all over again. A strange pain filled him, mixed with anger, not at the boy but at everything. How unfair the world was, how no one noticed boys like Lucas. He knew it, deep down, because nobody really noticed him back then either. And now, with all his power and money, he felt small, stood outside a restaurant blazing with lights. He heard a bark, turned around. The dog, the one Lucas called friend, was next to the dumpster, watching the direction Lucas had disappeared. The mutt wagged his tail, understanding, without judgment. Not just a companion, this dog was that boy's family. Real friendship, the kind that never abandons you. As the icy wind slipped down his collar, Gustavo realized he was trembling a little. Not from cold, but from memory. An old weight, like an ancient secret swelling up inside. He wondered, what if it had been me? If some man in a suit had given him a chance, even a kind word, would things have been different? Deep down, Gustavo always wanted someone to really see him. When he was a kid, selling candy at intersections, nobody ever looked him in the eye. He felt like he was truly invisible. He always figured, if he wanted to exist, he had to work 3 times as hard. Now, looking back, he saw time doesn't erase that. It just piles other things on top: money, success, cars. But that old hole never quite goes away. He stepped back, bumping into the cold metal bars of the door. He breathed deep, trying to swallow it all, let it go. But he couldn't. Images of the skinny boy, the frightened eyes, the bread falling on the sidewalk, they swirled inside him. Memories of his own childhood came sharp, eating only when there was anything left, going to bed hungry, vowing to himself nobody would ever give him orders again. He wanted to forget, but he couldn't. The smell of good food wafted from the kitchen and mixed with the stench of wet trash, so close to the smell of his own childhood. That stench was almost unbearable, reminded him of the times he'd peer through windows at little restaurants, a kid wanting just a chance, one slice of cake, a simple plate. Nobody ever offered. He could recite the faces of the waiters, the cooks, but nobody knew his name. Now it was supposed to be different, but it wasn't. He felt a huge distance, as if the past still had him by the hand, tugging him backward. His eyes filled with tears, but he blinked fast. No room for weakness here. Still, he couldn't slow his racing heart. In the corner, he saw the hostess beckoning him, motioning to come inside, all styled hair and professional smile. He ought to go in, focus on his meeting, but he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. For a while, he wondered, how many kids like Lucas are out there? How many invisible boys wander these streets, dreaming of being someone? Who sees them? Who gives them an actual chance? He felt small again. Not because of business, not for lack of wealth, but because he was an adult and still didn't know what to do when a child was hurting. Lucas's face flashed again, the boy fighting tears, hand shaking, the dog looking at him like it could read thoughts. It was impossible not to see himself in that gaze. Impossible not to recall the time of being invisible, yearning to be seen and getting only silence in return. There, standing at the door of the restaurant he'd longed to enter as a child, Gustavo felt a fierce urge, almost painful, to cross that line between watcher and someone who simply pretends not to see. He didn't quite know what he'd do, but he knew he couldn't just walk through the doors, sit at the table, and go on with life. Something had changed. Something old was waking up, and it couldn't be ignored. Gustavo hovered there, half-turned, his closed umbrella dripping at his wrist. He didn't know what to say or do. The boy was even smaller than before, huddled in the dumpster's shadow, clutching that soaking piece of bread as if it were gold, hands trembling. Friend let out a low bark, hoarse from the cold. For a moment, all you could hear was rain hitting the metal and the rumble of some truck far down the avenue. Lucas stayed put, alert to Gustavo's every move. The boy was ready to run. You could tell by the bend of his knees, his eyes locked on the man's steps like they might be traps. Gustavo tried to look calm, opened his mouth twice before speaking, bit his lip, glanced behind, as if waiting for someone to help. His voice came out lower. "Hey, kid. Come here. Nothing's going to happen." Lucas didn't blink. He just clung to the wall, hugging Friend to his belly. The dog wagged his tail, wagged with no fear, edging toward Gustavo, sniffing at the expensive shoes now spattered with mud. The businessman crouched slightly, moving slowly in case the dog might take fright. Friend just pressed his nose into Gustavo's warm, trembling hand. The boy crept forward, with effort, like he was crossing a rickety bridge. His fingers clung to the dog's fur, almost gripping it for dear life. His bare feet poked at puddles on the cold ground. He'd rather risk a cut from glass or whatever than leave the dog behind. Fear filled his eyes, but so did a glint of hope, the kind of maybe only a child carries after life has shoved them aside over and over. Gustavo saw Lucas's face, smeared with dirt, one eye red and a bit swollen. It was hard to tell if it was from crying or if someone had hit him. He had to take a deep breath. Images of his own face came back from years ago, the soles of his slippers dark with mud from roaming around. He felt a tightness in his chest, something strange, a mix of guilt and doubt. "It's all right, kid," he said again, softer this time, and in a different way. The tone shifted without him even noticing. He wasn't used to speaking like that. Lucas squeezed Amigo and looked at him, as if the dog understood things better than grown-ups. The animal looked up and barked again, one of those barks that doesn't scare anyone, that only says, "I'm here." Slowly, the boy edged a bit closer to the man. With every step, his body trembled, maybe more from the cold than from fear, but every muscle looked ready to run again. The hand gripping the bread was open now, but there was nothing left, just a handful of crumbs. He'd lost almost everything in the rush to escape. Gustavo stared at that bread on the ground and went silent for a few seconds. He didn't know what to do. Inside, he felt ashamed of his own reflection, the important man, dressed in a suit, who had frightened a boy. He really did regret it, but it was hard to admit. It would have been so easy just to walk away, slip inside the restaurant, leave it to the police or whoever else. But he stayed. "You're cold, aren't you?" he asked, glancing at those small feet, marked and caked in mud. Lucas nodded, slowly, voiceless, as if scared to speak out loud. The wind whistled through the alley, even stronger. "Your name's Lucas?" The boy's eyes went wide, as though he was startled to hear his own name from someone important's mouth. He didn't answer, not then. He just pulled his dog closer, and Amigo barked again, calmly, locking eyes with Gustavo. "Come on. There's hot food inside. You don't have to. You don't have to run, okay? You and him." He nodded at the dog, knowing that was the only way Lucas would follow. The boy's throat seemed locked up. He stared at the restaurant's back door like it was a cliff edge. Maybe he was ashamed, maybe it seemed too dangerous. But he nodded slowly. He only moved because Amigo trotted ahead, wagging his tail and weaving between Gustavo's legs, dragging a dirty rag of a tail across the floor. Along the way, Lucas stumbled, but grabbed onto the dog and stayed upright. His eyes never left the man in the suit. He was afraid it would all turn in an instant, like it always did for him. That he'd relax for a second, think it was safe, and then someone would shout or drag him away or hurt him. Gustavo noticed. He stopped at the door, looked back, crouched down, almost at child's height, his face close, but not too close. He looked deep into the boy's eyes in the dark and just said quietly, "My mom used to tell me you have to help when you can. Today it's my turn." And that's when Lucas let out a tiny sigh, one no one else heard. But his whole body seemed to relax for just that 1 second. For that moment, he wasn't just a street kid in the rain. He was simply a boy, hungry, hopeful, wanting to trust someone again. Gustavo opened the door. The three walked in together, the businessman, the boy, and Amigo. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside it felt like a little bit of warmth and hope was being born, even if none of them were sure of it yet. The first thing you feel, stepping inside, is the dry heat hitting your face. Outside, rain still streaks the restaurant windows, everything a bit fogged, with that smell of wet concrete and good food sneaking through the cracks. Lucas, barefoot, walks gingerly, his grimy feet touching a polished floor that feels far too cold. He stands still for a second, as if afraid of touching something forbidden, his eyes darting from side to side, searching for the best place to hide. Gustavo steps in right behind him, straightening the lapels of his suit, an automatic gesture. His face shows that stiff look, furrowed brow, straight mouth, but there's something different in his eyes, almost shining. He just gives Lucas's shoulder a tiny tap, barely felt, not to guide, really, just to say, easy. Stay with me. Time almost stops in there. Behind the counter, a waiter, about 20, folds a napkin and gives them a steady look, eyes cutting straight through them, asking silently, "What's that kid doing here?" On the other side, two well-dressed women, gold bracelets glinting, sigh and clutch their handbags tighter to their sides. The clicking of their heels on the tile rattles with judgment, each step telling Lucas, this isn't your place. In a corner, two security guards in dark suits stand with arms crossed, chatting low, but Lucas hears. It's the usual. Man, the smell, this isn't right. One scratches his nose and shakes his head, like even tolerating was too much to ask. Lucas feels all of it, every detail. The cold floor, the urge to grab the dog's fur again, but Amigo stayed outside, settling under the awning. He'd learned long ago to watch from a distance, but now, for once, everyone was watching him. Gustavo stops in the middle of the room. He picks a table, right in the center. He gestures to Lucas, awkwardly, and pulls out a chair like it weighs a ton, or as if every single stare was weighing it down. He runs a hand down the side of his face, removes his glasses, and looks at the boy. Lucas swallows hard. He can't even remember the last time he sat at a table like this. He almost trips over the chair leg, hovers there, unsure if he's allowed to sit, if he really should. Only when Gustavo gestures again does he finally lower himself, carefully, staying hunched and on guard. The silence is deafening. You can hear the tinkle of silverware, a glass settling down, the held breath of other customers. The smell of freshly baked bread and good coffee fills the air, and Lucas closes his eyes for just a second, trying to remember the simple bread his mother used to make, back when they still had flour at home. When he opens them again, his fingers are trembling on the edge of the table, his eyes welling, but he holds it in, won't let anything spill. Gustavo calls the waiter with an unhurried flick of his hand. The man comes, but stops more than a meter away, barely glancing at Lucas. Speaking low to Gustavo, he says, "Sir, it's not allowed." But he feels that steady gaze, senses money in the room, and finishes with, "Is there anything else I can help you with?" Gustavo wastes no time. He just says, firm but never raising his voice, "A good hot plate, please." For the boy. The authority rolls through the room. The waiter gulps, picks up on the mood, doesn't argue. Just walks away too fast, breathing like he's suddenly short on air. Lucas keeps his eyes on his hands, rubbing his thumb against the worn tabletop. Inside, his heart's pounding so loud he thinks everyone can hear it. He can feel he's in the way. You can sense it in the smells, the glances, the whispers. At the next table, an old man with white hair pulls his glass closer, pinching his nose. A filthy, unknown boy isn't supposed to be here. The girl sitting with him, maybe 12 years old, watches Lucas with curiosity mingled with pity, but her mother quickly pulls her aside, as if contact might give her a disease. Lucas hardly notices. He just keeps an eye on the exit, waiting for the dog's paw to tap the glass. But for a moment, a sharp happiness stabs him, as if his stomach already knows it's about to taste real food, the kind he only dreamed of while sleeping in cardboard boxes. Gustavo's watching it all, serious but jiggling one leg beneath the table, hiding his tension. Every contemptuous look seems to sap his strength, but he doesn't give up. Now and then he glances at Lucas, and inside, memories, sharp and aching, twist at him. Hunger, shame, how his own childhood never had a fancy table or friendly faces. The feeling is bitter, suffocating, a knot that begs to turn into tears, but he holds it together. Because here, now, he can't let himself go. The waiter drops the plate down, nearly tossing it, never meeting their eyes. The silverware rattles against the dish. On the plate, fluffy rice, beans smelling of garlic, a chunk of meat, a slice of golden bread. The smell makes Lucas's stomach growl. He looks down, almost apologetic, but Gustavo just gives him the faintest, lopsided smile. Lucas pauses a second. He presses his hands together, closes his eyes, and gives silent thanks, just like his mother taught him. His voice won't come out. It's just a whisper. Then, with an awkward little motion, he picks up his fork and begins to eat, trembling, slowly, chewing carefully like he wants each bite to last forever. The stares, the whispers, they keep coming. But for Lucas, for that little while, it's only the taste of food, the warmth in his chest, and the unlikely sense of belonging, even if it's just a plate of rice and beans on a rainy night. Across the table, Gustavo watches, taking it all in, thinking of everything, and a piece of him wonders, how did the world ever let this boy end up here, like this? While Lucas sat there, small in the big chair, holding the fork as if it might snap, his plate steaming before him, his eyes weren't just hungry, they were lost. Unsure if he should eat, look at the floor, or thank them all again. It was like he'd been suddenly dropped onto a new planet. The restaurant, all bright lights and expensive perfume and fine food, felt quieter than ever. Voices that were lively and carefree only moments before faded away. Only whispers remained, a little poisonous, coming from Gustavo's business partner's table. They wore nice suits, silk ties, heavy stares. One snickered under his breath. What's up with Gustavo? Hiring bums now. Another fiddled with his phone, shooting Lucas a look like he'd just walked through a locked door. The third, the oldest, wore a lemon-sucking face. He didn't even look at the boy, just glared at Gustavo. This'll ruin our reputation. Gustavo sat up straight, closed his eyes for a second. It was like he was trying to click the world to mute. His usually steady hand trembled just holding his water glass. Inside, he wrestled with something heavy. He felt the sting of their scorn, the fear of seeming weak in a sea of men in tailored suits, but also a surge of anger at all of it. Lucas's meal was plain, rice, beans, a scrap of meat. From afar, it looked like nothing. But to him, it was the feast of a lifetime. Still, Lucas kept looking to Gustavo, silently asking permission. The partners watched again, faces set hard, one of them whispering, he's lost it. He'll throw away everything you built. Across the room, two sharply dressed women started in, sure the kid couldn't hear. Can you believe this? It's dangerous. A nervous waitress hurried past, swerving as if Lucas might dirty the floor just by sitting there. Amigo lay curled by the chair, the only soul in the place who didn't care about any of it. He just wagged his tail and watched Lucas, silent encouragement between two invisibles. The pressure built inside Gustavo, like a wave at his chest. He watched his partners out the corner of his eye, then looked at the boy. His thoughts tangled with pride and fear. For a moment, an old memory burned, his own father shamed for being simple. The knot rose in his throat. One partner nudged Gustavo, trying to play it off. Shouldn't we get back to our meeting? The real client is waiting. That one stung. Gustavo glanced at his own plate, pushed it aside, and drew a full breath. Each inhale seemed to demand courage. Inside, he wondered, if I cave in now, who am I really? Do I do as they expect, or do I do what's right? Gustavo's silence was thick with questions. Meanwhile, Lucas, not knowing any of this, started to eat with his hands because that heavy silverware felt alien. Even with his head bowed, it was clear he wanted nothing more than to vanish. Other diners couldn't help themselves, shooting dirty looks, wrinkling their noses, a few whispering, "He really does smell like the street." An elderly man signaled for the manager, asking if this was really going to happen in front of everyone. The manager edged over, nervous, mopping his brow with a napkin. He looked at Gustavo with an apologetic face and muttered, "Dr. Gustavo, maybe this isn't a good idea." Gustavo looked straight at him, steady. His face was tired and resolute at once. He answered, cool but not cruel, driven only by the urge to tolerate injustice no longer. "This is my table. Tonight, I choose who sits here." The manager just gulped and backed off. Amigo gave a little bark, a flash of happiness. Gustavo looked at Lucas, still shaking, and asked quietly, "You okay? Comfortable?" The boy just nodded, eyes down. He tried for a smile, but it got lost in his fear. Outside, rain pounded the window, making the warmth inside feel stifling. Cars flashed by, splashing both curbs. Inside, only the rattle of plates, the anxious breathing of the partners, and the quiet eating of the child broke the air. Gustavo's thoughts spun on. He knew this gesture might cost a lot: contracts, friends, the respect of all the bigwigs around town. But then it struck him. No one had ever looked at him like this when he was a boy. No one had ever stopped to ask if he needed dinner, or rest, or comfort. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time, he could be that person. "I'm not ashamed of doing what's right," he thought. His cheeks stayed flushed and his palms still clammy, but his heart held steady. Someone at a neighboring table spoke up, loud, "This country's finished. Now bums dine with the rich." Gustavo acted like he didn't hear, but he felt it. It weighed on him, but his pride outgrew it. He avoided looking straight at Lucas, but kept glancing over, seeing the boy more courageous than any of those men in suits. The silence got heavier. But, in some strange way, Gustavo felt lighter, because seeing Lucas, eating so carefully, he didn't see just a starving kid. He saw someone who held on to hope when the whole world seemed to root against him. The tension in the restaurant lingered, but at Gustavo's table it was pure defiance. He knew there'd be fights to come, arguments and lost business and stares. Right then, though, he decided he wouldn't back down, not for partners, not out of fear, not for anyone. And while Lucas, still anxious, tried to burrow into the chair itself, Gustavo, for the first time in years, felt that despite all those judging eyes, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Lucas doesn't handle the utensils like other children might. He holds the fork carefully, a little awkwardly, the way someone does when it's not a habit. The plate in front of him is a treasure, something beautiful that could disappear any second, so he just takes tiny bites, chews slowly, like every bit should last the whole night. At first, Lucas hardly looks at Gustavo. He keeps his head down, only glancing up now and then to see if he's still allowed to be here, if no one's coming to take him, or his food, away. You can see him curling in on himself, his left shoulder slightly ahead of the right, almost as a shield. On his left hand, by the plate, there's a raw red mark from the cold, the kind you get when the street is unkind. Gustavo sits there in silence. He even breathes slower, not sure what to say. He feels all the eyes around them, but at that table, for one instant, it seems like it's just him, the boy, the food, and the faint sound of a fork scraping the plate's edge. When Gustavo asks, "Where are you from, Lucas?" the question comes out softer than he expected. It sounds honest, like someone who wants to listen, not just know. Lucas looks at him, glances away, unsure if he should answer. He smooths his ripped pants, glances at Amigo lying beside him, and gradually begins to speak. His voice is quiet, but steady. He says it's just him and Amigo now, that his mother, she was so kind, sir, got sick and couldn't see a doctor. She always said God would help, but the days got bad, and then she couldn't get out from under the blankets. Lucas tells it like kids do, kids who've already seen too much grief. He rubs his nose on the back of his hand, trying not to cry. He says that after his mother left, he was alone on the street. At first, it was hard to even understand what the nighttime silence was, without anyone nearby. He felt scared, so hungry, and sometimes a huge ache to just be hugged one more time. There's a part of the story where Lucas pauses, thinks, and takes a deep breath, as if sorting the words inside his belly. Then, with a hint of embarrassment, he confides softly that he knows how to read. "My mother taught me, sir. She'd give me an old book, read by the streetlight. I liked hearing the letters." Gustavo just listens. His eyes, tired from 1,000 important meetings, start to glisten, though he disguises it. He traces the napkin, looks at his plate, returns his gaze to Lucas, careful not to seem weak. He says nothing, but you can feel it. This story wounds differently. It's not like stories in the news. Lucas goes on. He tells how he promised his mom never to steal. She'd say it every night before bed. "Son, whatever the cold, whatever the hunger, you only ask gently and with honesty because God sees who you are." And he believes it. You see it in the way he looks at the bread, like it's something earned by decency. And then he speaks of his dream. This time, his voice shines. "Sir, I want to go to school. It's been a dream for a long time, to be a waiter, here, in this nice restaurant." He gives a crooked, shy smile. "I figure if I do my job right, just like the men in suits, no one will ever kick me out of anywhere again. I'll earn money and never be sad again." Gustavo breathes deep, swallowing a lump in his throat. He wonders how a small child, caked with mud, hungry and cold, could speak about dreams with such care. He looks at Lucas's hands, the way he cradles the fork like a rare thing. A memory snaps to life, his own childhood, sharing stale bread with his sister in a dirt yard. He'd almost forgotten what simple hope tasted like. The restaurant's chatter is muffled and distant. Nobody seems to care, but Gustavo doesn't hear anything now except Lucas's voice. He realizes people are noticing. Some customers turn sideways, whisper. Waiters dodge their table, as if afraid or disgusted by the boy's tattered clothes. But none of that has any hold on Gustavo anymore. Lucas takes another bit of food, looks at Amigo under the table, and hides a small piece under his napkin. Thinking no one sees, he murmurs, "It's for my friend. He stayed with me when I was alone." He says it softly, almost guilty for having pity on the dog when he, a child, is the one really hungry. Rain beats the glass outside. From the street you see the cars slicing through water, headlights diffused and blurred. In here, Gustavo and Lucas's table feels like a different world, shut off from the rest. For a while, Gustavo forgets the meeting, the expensive clothes, the serious decisions. All he wants now is to hear the boy's story to the end. Lucas wraps up his tale with tired eyes, still holding on to a gentle dignity, something that outlasts all he suffered. He doesn't beg. He doesn't plead. He just waits. He waits, maybe, for a smile, or for someone to tell him it's worth dreaming. At that moment, just the way Gustavo looks at him, it's as if the dream becomes a little bit more real. For a few moments, no one knew what to say. The restaurant, so recently full of laughter and silverware and muffled conversations, had changed. It was as if all sound faded away, leaving only Gustavo, Lucas, and an awkward silence. All you could hear, in the corner, was the slow scrape of a fork against porcelain. That was all. Lucas busied himself with crumbs, distracted, his fingers sticky with sauce and bread. He didn't look at anyone, just kept his head down, as if that plate was the safest place in the world. Despite the grubby clothes and hollow eyes, there was something in his way of being, a quiet grace, even with all the pain. Amigo, the dog, already dozed by his leg, mouth open and breathing heavy, as if he too now knew he didn't have to stay on guard. Now and then he twitched in his sleep, whimpered, but never once left Lucas's side. At first, some waiters kept sending uneasy looks, fidgeting with their trays, impatient for this situation to end. But soon, they started keeping their eyes low, as if ashamed of themselves. No one really knew what to say to a boy so small, sharing so much sorrow with so much honesty. There was one woman on the staff, Anna, who didn't even try to hide how much it got to her. She turned her back, dabbed at her eyes quickly with a napkin, hoping nobody would notice her. It was impossible not to feel something, hearing Lucas talk about the promises he'd made his mom, about cold nights under awnings, about days of eating stale bread and sometimes nothing at all. Gustavo mostly stayed still, not saying much. Anyone glancing his way, at the expensive suit and serious face, might think he felt nothing. But there was something different in how he looked at the boy. His eyes shone, you know that odd shine, when you're holding back tears. His voice caught in his throat a few times, but he wouldn't let it out. He'd just glance at his plate, take a steady breath, wipe his hand, do anything except face his own feelings. Sometimes a customer would risk a look at their table, but always from the corner of their eye. It was like nobody was quite sure whether they should judge, gossip, get indignant, or just feel sorry. Nearly everyone struggled to pretend they hadn't heard Lucas's story. It was impossible, really. Underneath it all, you could still hear the rain pounding outside, ringing off the metal window guards and running down the sidewalk. The smell of wet streets would drift in at times. Even under a warm roof, Lucas could feel the cold clinging to his skin, but he did his best not to show it. When he spoke about his mother, he paused. His lip trembled, his eyes filled, but he swallowed the tears like someone used to swallowing everything. He said softly, almost whispering, that his mom was afraid he'd turn out like the world out there. And at that moment, with that simple phrase, 2 or 3 people couldn't hold back. Heads dropped, tears fell. It was like nobody wanted to show their face just then. The feeling in the room deepened. It was a mix of shame, compassion, and wanting to do something, but not knowing what. Some waiters lingered near the kitchen, listening quietly, softly shaking their heads. A busboy stopped by Gustavo, mumbled low, "That's real courage, huh?" Gustavo tried to reply, but couldn't. He just made a small gesture, maybe thanks, and looked at Lucas's plate again. As the hush fell, Lucas explained, still simply, that he never took from anyone, only asked. He repeated 3 times that he'd rather be hungry than break the promise to his mother. And you could tell, it wasn't for show. It was nothing but the truth, impossible to doubt. All the while, old memories churned inside Gustavo. Images kept flashing from his rough childhood, nights with no dinner. He thought he'd forgotten those days, or told himself he had. But watching Lucas, eating so carefully and holding back tears, brought everything heavy rushing back. It was like seeing himself, years ago, only now with a kind of power he never imagined he'd have. Amigo snuggled closer to Lucas, gave his arm a lick, and the boy smiled, a shy smile, almost, as if he was afraid of being too happy. It was obvious that, for him, this was more than just dinner. It was relief, a chance, maybe even the first step in an old dream. Someone opened a door in the kitchen, and the smell of fresh food mixed with the scent of rain. Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. No one was in a rush anymore, no one worried about the clock or Gustavo's business deals. For some reason, everyone wanted to stay, to listen to what came next. Time had slowed to a standstill. And did Lucas cry? No. He just let a genuine smile slip as Amigo drifted to sleep without a single bit of fear. But anyone close by could sense that if there were tears at that strange dinner, they flowed from the inside out, they cut through the silence, made the food slide down more slowly, even changed the way people looked at the barefoot boy who never stopped dreaming. The sound of Lucas's fork grew quieter, almost disappearing. On his plate was only a bit of bread, already turning hard, a small leftover. The boy looked at it for a moment. He chewed it slowly, closing his eyes. Anyone could see by the look on his face that it wasn't only hunger. It was respect, almost. As if eating at the table, with lights, with someone watching, was a rare gift you could never waste. Across from him, Gustavo didn't pretend. Arms crossed, brow furrowed, the look of a man who's juggling 1,000 thoughts at once. But there was something different in his face now. Not just surprise, nor that severity from before. It was like a weight, you know? As if the boy's words had opened a door at the back of his heart, one he'd forgotten even existed. Lucas noticed that Amigo, the dog, had woken up at the smell of bread. He sat quietly, just watching, tongue out, tail wagging. Lucas picked up the last bit of bread, split it in two, and leaned down softly. The kind of thing you do when you've been hit for drawing attention before. Almost whispering, he offered the bread to the dog. Here, Amigo. You deserve some too, he said, his voice thick with held-back tears. The dog's eyes sparkled, and he wolfed down the piece as if it were a king's feast. At the surrounding tables, men in dress shirts and women in expensive dresses pretended not to notice. But they did. You could feel a chilly hush in the air, broken now and then by the clatter of a dropped utensil or a stifled giggle. A young waiter passing by with a bottle to refill glasses paused for a second, watched, then hurried on, as if he couldn't let himself witness it. Gustavo watched it all. He tried not to show it, but when Lucas smiled at Amigo and stroked the dog's ear, something inside him just crumbled. Gustavo's eyes turned a bit red, and he rubbed his nose, playing it off. The man who always knew how to boss people around, hand out scoldings, order important people around, now he felt small in the face of that simple act of kindness from a child. A movie played in Gustavo's mind. Flashes of his own childhood, the old house, water dripping from the ceiling on rainy nights, his tired mother splitting stale bread between him and his sisters. He remembered dreading the winter, the clothes that were always too tight. He'd forgotten the pain of being ashamed to ask for help. On the floor, Amigo finished the bread and licked Lucas's hand. The boy giggled, a little shyly, and wiped his hand on his pants, not complaining. He looked at the bread that was no longer on his plate but didn't ask for more. He just fidgeted in his chair, as if he still couldn't believe he was really there, without anyone telling him to leave. The chill from the street stayed outside. Inside it was warm, but his stomach, used to so little, still grumbled its resistance. Gustavo swallowed hard. He leaned forward, arms on the table. His voice came out softer, almost gentle. Your dog, have you known each other long? He asked. Lucas looked back, taking his time to answer. You could feel the old fear, that sense a question might be a trick to throw him out. Lucas just nodded. Since the day I slept next to him, over by the bus stop. He took care of me when it rained. I always share whatever I can find with him. The words spilled out fast, as if they hurt a little. He never bit me. He just stays with me. Silence again. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone banged a pot. At the table, Gustavo looked at the remaining bread and felt a sting in his chest. You could see it in his eyes. He could order any fancy dish, buy the whole restaurant if he wanted. But sitting there, he realized he had no idea how to get close to a story like this. Customers nudged each other, whispered. Some smirked, mocking. An older lady scowled and clutched her purse close, as if in fear. Gustavo felt it all weighing him down, not just for himself, but for Lucas too. He realized the boy's fight wasn't just against hunger, but against those stairs, the icy wall that forms around people at the bottom. Still, Lucas didn't let go of his smile for his dog. He stifled a laugh when Amigo tried to jump on the chair and gently said, "No, not here. Here we're not allowed." He spoke quietly, but kindly, teaching the dog the rules of a world that, truthfully, wasn't built for them. Gustavo thought, and really, he felt a whole opening inside him. He realized it wasn't just about the boy, it was about himself too. He wanted to help, to find the right words, the right gesture, maybe even the courage. But so many things held him back. A partner watching from afar, the restaurant's security guys, the fear of becoming the butt of someone's joke. The boy finished eating, quickly wiped his mouth with a napkin, rolled his little fingers up in it, as if it were gold. He tucked what was left of the bread in his pocket, for later, or maybe for another stray dog he might find. That tiny gesture finally broke the hardness in Gustavo's eyes. He straightened in his chair, exhaled slowly, as if for the first time feeling the warmth of that place. In the middle of all that, Lucas calmed Amigo, petting him until he laid down again. He looked up and met Gustavo's eyes for a moment, not defiant, but a mix of hope and uncertainty. In that silent exchange, Gustavo understood more than words ever could. Outside, the rain still drummed against the window. The world hadn't changed. But at that table, between a dirty little boy, a skinny dog, and a rich man still figuring out how to act, something new was stirring. Not a decision, not a promise. Just that raw urge to do things differently. Now, the silence didn't cut. It listened. The restaurant was big, full of well-dressed people all talking in low voices. The smell of good food mixed with strong perfume from the ladies, those restrained laughs, and the sound of dishes clattering from the kitchen. Gustavo and Lucas sat at a table near the window, a bit off to the side, rain pounding outside, making that soothing sound of water on glass. Even after eating a little, Lucas still looked around, lost, always with that look of someone expecting to get kicked out any second. Other clients glanced sideways, some wrinkled their noses, some whispered under their breath, but everyone noticed. It was impossible not to. A boy so small, with dirty feet marking up the carpet, clothes soaked and clinging to his body, trying to shrink himself so as not to bother anyone. Gustavo saw it all. The shame running down Lucas's face, his hand clutching the napkin, the nerves when a waiter got close. Even the dog, Amigo, sensed something different. He lay quietly beside the boy's chair, his tail just gently tapping the ground, not even begging, as if he knew he had to be discreet. With each judgmental glance, Gustavo felt anger, sadness, and doubt swirl inside him. He heard the business partners, old friends, tossing glances from across the room, whispering things like, "What's he doing?" or "Imagine if the press finds out." Even the manager came over quietly, asking if he wanted the child and dog to be removed. Gustavo sat silent for a moment, looking at Lucas, who swallowed hard, bracing for the worst. The urge to protect that boy grew inside him. Suddenly, he saw himself in Lucas, once hungry, once hopeless, never really seen. It shook everything he'd always believed. Then Lucas, with innocent eyes, looked at Gustavo and whispered, "If you want me to leave, I get it, sir. I just wanted to eat some bread. I promised to leave the plate clean." His voice trembled. Even under all the stares, he was still polite. It broke your heart. The quiet grew so heavy it was as if no one dared to breathe. In that moment, Gustavo felt angry at himself for hesitating. He looked around at the manager, the waiters, the rich clients, some laughing, others shaking their heads in silent disapproval. And it was like a fire lit inside him. Gustavo stood up, pushed his chair back, loudly, on purpose. He picked up Lucas's glass, filled it with juice, and said, loud and clear, not yelling, but with that solid voice that demanded respect, "From now on, this boy is welcome to have dinner with me at my table, whenever he wants. If anyone has a problem with it, that's your issue, not Lucas's." Silence. The whole room froze. A lady raised her eyebrows, a man in a suit blushed, a couple tried not to laugh, but the youngest waiter, the one whose eyes still had a kind glint, stepped back, almost smiling with pride. A few clapped, timidly. Others just lowered their heads, ashamed, pretending it had nothing to do with them. In that cold haze, Lucas's eyes grew wide, breath speeding up, a mix of fear and surprise. He couldn't quite believe it. His hands trembled harder. Neither he nor Gustavo knew what to say at first. They just looked at each other. It felt like the first time anyone had said out loud that Lucas had a right to be there, to eat like anyone else. The manager tried to argue, but Gustavo just waved a hand. Enough. It was firm, maybe a bit cold, But as if at last, he decided this place could be better too. At the next table, a little kid about 6 years old looked at Lucas with shining eyes, maybe thinking it was beautiful, maybe just different. Awkward, Lucas smiled back, sweetly, in a way that said he knew how precious true acceptance could be. Amigo lifted his head, wagged his tail harder, as if sensing the air change. Lucas straightened in his chair, still clutching the napkin, and, for the first time, seemed a little more at ease. His face, used to looking down, now met Gustavo's gaze with less fear. Gustavo felt guilty for never having done this before. For so long, he just pretended not to see. Now it all felt ridiculous, felt small, felt unimportant. Looking again at the boy, he realized how much a simple decision could transform everything. Not just for Lucas. For himself, too. Minutes passed, and the restaurant's usual hum slowly returned. Someone nearby whispered about courage, about compassion this time. Gustavo heard it, but now he wasn't ashamed. He just thought how, at that table, that night, maybe something real was starting at last. Some even came over, heads lowered, leaving extra pieces of bread by Lucas's plate, pretending it was just a casual gesture. Maybe, deep down, they were touched. Maybe just testing out a different side of life in the big city. On that winter night, in a restaurant full of luxury, a small scene made people look at things differently. No one pretended Lucas was invisible anymore. For a few minutes, everything seemed possible, that a barefoot boy might actually, truly, sit at the table with the wealthy, smile among them, and, who knows, maybe someday change every gaze that once only knew how to reject. Outside the restaurant, a thin drizzle still fell, the pavement reflecting the golden lights of the frontage, the wet cars swishing by, muffled by the thick walls. Gustavo paused there for a moment, watching Lucas. The boy held tight to Amigo's makeshift leash, a bit of string and a ragged scrap of cloth. The dog wagged his tail, as if he knew something wonderful was happening. Gustavo walked over slowly, his hand in his pocket, his face serious, but with that look of someone trying to keep something in fear, maybe, or the doubt of whether he was doing the right thing. He wasn't sure what to say. For a few seconds, he stood there, just watching the boy and the dog under the canopy. Gustavo's umbrella dripped softly to the ground. Lucas trembled more from emotion than cold, but he pretended it was just the rain. His eyes went from the ground to Gustavo, and then to the black car parked nearby. He was scared, hopeful, and somewhere in there was a shard of mistrust he couldn't let go of. Gustavo took a deep breath. "Would you like to see my home?" he said, his voice raspy, as though every word snagged on his chest on its way out. Lucas didn't answer right away. He looked at the dog, who already tugged the leash toward the gate, tail wagging, splashing water everywhere. Lucas bit his lip. He thought about all the other nights, all the broken promises from well-dressed adults, the come back tomorrow, as said without a look in the eye, the dreams he buried every night with an empty stomach. But this man seemed different, maybe because he didn't use a voice full of promises, just a tired voice, or because he bothered to ask. So, even with his heart pounding and his voice stuck, Lucas nodded, trying not to show too much excitement. Gustavo smiled, just on one side, like someone who never learned to smile for pictures, but meant it. He crouched down, opened the car door. The back seat was big, covered in soft leather. "You can get in." "Amigo too," he said, holding the door. Lucas slipped off his muddy shoes. Well, just a pair of ruined flip-flops, and got in barefoot. Moving so carefully it was like he was afraid to ruin something precious. Amigo jumped onto the seat, wagging his tail, muddying everything up, but Gustavo, for the first time that night, let out a real laugh. The engine purred to life. Inside it was so warm the windows fogged up quickly. The wipers beat out a rhythm, and the new leather smell, for some reason, made Lucas want to cry. He kept his eyes fixed on the window, watching the city lights slipping by. His heart thudded so loud it echoed in his chest. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. This silence was different, nothing like the silence of the street at night. This one was comfortable, but strange all the same. Gustavo watched through the rearview mirror. His eyes were serious, dull for a moment, as if he'd become a kid too. "Do you like dogs?" Lucas asked quietly, not taking his eyes off the window, as if that was the most important thing in the world now. Gustavo looked surprised at the question, caught off guard. "A lot. I had one when I was a boy. He was my best friend too." Lucas hugged Amigo close and smiled in the shadow of the seat, not showing his teeth. The dog nestled into his lap at last, finally settling down. The drive took less time than Lucas had imagined. The street sped by, full of pretty lights and colorful store windows. The boy tried not to let it show, but his eyes darted everywhere. When Gustavo stopped at a red light, he watched Lucas in the mirror, noticing small things, how Lucas bit his lip, how his toes twitched at every turn, as if trying to learn what it meant to feel safe, even for just a minute. 1,000 questions spun in Lucas's head. Is this real? Are they really going to let me stay? Can the dog come too? He just hoped he wouldn't wake up, hoped it wouldn't turn into another night where dreams faded too quickly. Gustavo, up front, had never felt so much all at once. He was afraid he'd let them down, afraid he wouldn't be able to handle something this big. But there was a quiet pride too, that warmth that lets us see the world differently. Almost arriving, Gustavo broke the silence. Lucas, just wanted you to know that, from now on, things can be different. No one will make you leave anywhere ever again. Not you, and not your friend. Lucas looked in the mirror, tried to judge if he could believe it. He didn't say anything, just hugged Amigo tighter, feeling the dog's warm nose nuzzle his hand. Gustavo's gate was enormous, all metal, yellow lights brightening a huge garden inside the wall. When the gate opened, the car rolled in slowly, and Lucas held his breath. It was too beautiful, too big, like a place in a movie or from an ad. Inside the car, Gustavo looked back one last time before climbing out. Ready to start again? He asked, but it was almost like he was asking himself too. Lucas paused, took a deep breath, felt a knot in his chest. He rested his hand on the dog, looked Gustavo in the eye, and nodded, not with certainty, but with courage, with the need to believe more than knowing what tomorrow would hold. Neither of them rushed out. Gustavo got out slowly. Lucas, still feeling the seat's warmth and the car smell, took a little longer. When he finally stepped onto the garage floor, dry and safe, he looked up at the whole house waiting just for him to discover, for him and Amigo. The night outside was still pitch black, but in there, something was beginning that changed everything. It's funny how you think you know what silence is, until you walk into a house like that, in the middle of the night, after so long hearing nothing but the noise of the street. Lucas crept in, barely breathing, Amigo glued to his ankle. The floor gleamed, reflecting the soft yellow lights overhead, everything spotless, none of that frying oil or wet garbage smell that always followed Lucas. For the first time, everything smelled new, like soap and clean wood. Gustavo opened the door, still with that stiff grown-up manner of someone who doesn't quite know what to do with a child. He looked at Lucas, awkward, trying to hide his worry behind a tiny smile. Lucas didn't know where to look. Everything was massive, the couch, the curtains, the chandelier that belonged in a TV show. He'd never been this far from the hard ground and the cold wind outside. He felt strange, as if this whole place was made of glass, about to break if he touched a thing. Gustavo asked Lucas to follow him up the stairs. Each step was a challenge for the boy, feet still dirty from the rain, gripping the handrail tightly, feeling its smooth surface. The businessman showed him around, but with simple words, almost whispering, as if afraid to spook the boy. Lucas kept glancing back to check if Amigo was still trailing with him. Down a hallway, doors opened and closed softly until, finally, Gustavo stopped in front of a room. "This one's for you," he said, voice low but steady. Lucas stepped inside, barely believing it. The window was huge, overlooking part of the city and rain-soaked lights. The carpet was soft, almost funny to step on. In the corner, a bed that seemed enormous. Amigo bounded straight to the bed, sniffing everywhere, until he found a little cushion just for him, warm and cozy in a way no street dog could have imagined existed. He circled a few times, flopped down, let out a happy sigh, and relaxed like Lucas had never seen before. He almost smiled, if a dog can smile with their eyes. Lucas touched everything, gently. A drawer, a pillow so fluffy he bit it for a second, just to check it was real. He saw a pair of pajamas folded on the bed, blue, with a picture of a rocket. For a moment, he stood still, hand on the fabric. The last pajamas he'd worn, he couldn't remember, maybe back when his mother was still alive. His chest ached with longing, but that ache came tangled up with relief so new it nearly hurt. Noticing how lost the boy looked, Gustavo came back in, leaning in the doorway. "All of this is yours now," he said, his voice thick, trying to sound normal, but his eyes shining with emotion. Lucas, still unsure, whispered, "We really get to sleep here?" Gustavo gave a tiny smile, nodded, and added, "Sleep easy. No one will hurt you or Amigo here. You're safe." The boy undressed slowly, not rushing, like someone who doesn't want to wake from a dream. He put on the clean pajamas, fabric soft, unpatched, hugging skin toughened by wind and sun. He stared into the mirror, barely recognizing himself, so far from the street boy with tired eyes. Amigo was already nearly snoring, curled up and content. Lucas burrowed under the covers, breathing deep, almost in tears. He had never smelled sheets so clean. The cold that always clung to him stayed outside. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the comfortable hush. Rain tapped outside, but inside, there was only warmth. In the dark, Lucas tried to remember his mother's words. She used to tell him he was strong, that one day someone good would help. He thought maybe she could see this, wherever she was. A tear slid down his cheek, but it was one of joy, the kind that gives you goosebumps. He reached out, felt Amigo beside him, breathing heavy and safe. For the first time, they would sleep together, in a real bed, safe and sheltered. Gustavo, from the hallway, waited before switching off the light. He looked at the scene, the boy, the dog, the way Lucas clutched the pillow, and felt a strange emptiness filling up his chest. But this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was something else. The urge to care, to protect. He remembered a tough childhood, dreams that never fit in borrowed beds. He took a deep breath, discreetly wiped the corner of his eye, and quietly closed the door, leaving just a sliver of light. The night inched by, but for the first time since he'd lived on the streets, Lucas didn't wake up scared. He didn't ask for his mother, didn't fear yelling or someone kicking him awake. He dreamed of simple things: fresh bread on the table, someone smiling as he arrived at school, Amigo running freely in the backyard. When morning came, still unsure if it was real, Lucas opened his eyes and just listened to the sounds of the house. Footsteps heading to the kitchen, a muffled laugh, the smell of cake baking. It was a sound unlike any he'd ever heard. It was peace. Amigo stretched beside him, jumped on the bed, licking Lucas's hand. The two exchanged looks, as if neither quite believed it was true. But it was. Finally. The sun hadn't fully risen, and Gustavo was already up. He paused in Lucas's doorway for a moment, just to check. The boy was there, wrapped tight in a soft blanket, only the tip of his messy hair sticking out. By the bed, Amigo was sleeping belly up, as if that rug was the world's best place. Gustavo stepped down the stairs, feeling a blend of anxiety and hope. He'd never thought he'd wake up so early just for this, but now, he couldn't ignore things anymore. After days with Lucas at home, he couldn't forget what was still out there. Kids with no bed, no dog, no one to ask if they were cold. Breakfast was ready when Lucas shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. He smiled shyly, but the way he pulled out the chair, glancing at Gustavo with every move, showed he still didn't fully believe this new routine. Gustavo served bread and coffee with milk, trying to hide how moved he was just to see Lucas there. The boy whispered to ask if Amigo could have bread too, and Gustavo laughed, agreeing. In that instant, he understood that nothing in the world compares to this. The freedom to break bread with someone you love, without fear. Before we left, Lucas looked at me seriously and asked, "Where are we going today?" It was just curiosity, maybe even a little fear that the day would end and everything would disappear. Gustavo placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling that hard yet fragile bone of a skinny child, and replied, "We're going to change things." The drizzle had turned into a muggy, strange heat. The asphalt was still wet, the air filled with the smell of earth and bus exhaust. The car stopped at a big square, the kind that only looks colorful during the day. Now, early in the morning, hardly anyone spoke. Only the birds and the distant hum of traffic. Lucas stepped out slowly, and Amigo jumped out after him, wagging his tail. Gustavo had already told him. They were there to talk, to listen. It wasn't just about looking for food in the trash anymore. In the square, two little boys tossed pebbles as far as they could. An older girl held a baby wrapped in a filthy cloth, staring straight into Lucas's eyes. His cheeks burned with shame. It felt like he was seeing his own reflection. Still, he took a deep breath and waved at her, in that gentle way only someone who's known hunger understands. Gustavo greeted a man leaning on a light pole, asked whose kids these were. The guy laughed without meeting his eyes and answered, "Nobody's." That stung Gustavo. Nobody's. He closed his eyes for a moment, his chest tightening more than it ever did in any business meeting. They spent the morning listening to stories. Lucas barely spoke, sometimes clutching Amigo's paw, sometimes fiddling with the zipper on the jacket Gustavo had given him. But when a kid grew wary, it was Lucas who drew near, speaking low, assuring them nothing would be taken from them. It was only when one of the boys asked if Gustavo was that guy from the fancy restaurant that it became clear how fast news travels in the city. They whispered, pointed, and for many kids, it seemed impossible to imagine a man like that wasting time here. On the way back, silence filled the car, until Lucas spoke, soft and full of shyness. "Can I help? I remember where more boys sleep, near the market street." Gustavo smiled, nodded. You'll be my guide, Lucas. The boy puffed out his chest, eyes shining with pride. The next days were a whirlwind like Gustavo had never known. Meetings with social workers, talks with people from City Hall, prosecutors, priests, and volunteers. Where once there was only the sound of luxury cars, now Gustavo, always with Lucas and Amigo, walked the alleys, learned the names of the boys and girls, asked who could help. Word got out, bit by bit. Some people doubted, thought it was all just PR. But soon the restaurant staff started whispering about the half-loaf and that barefoot boy who now walked through the front door. Lucas became a reference point. He arrived without saying much, just those sharp eyes and a quick smile. Often, it was Lucas who gave the first hug to frightened children. Gustavo watched it all, nearly always quiet, wondering how someone so small could teach so much, just with kindness. While papers were signed, meetings happened. Gustavo tried to think of everything: a place, food, counseling, school, beds, even a new dog toy for Amigo. It became clear to everyone this wouldn't be just a stopover shelter. It had to be a place where a kid could dream. The Institute of Hope was born first in a wide hallway, crowded with people hurrying in and out. The walls were still bare, but Lucas was already sketching out colorful plans with chalk on the floor. He said, "There'll be a big board here to put up pictures of new families." And Gustavo, leaning in the doorway, felt something rise in his throat, not sadness or joy, but that sweet ache of someone watching hope sprout where nobody thought it possible. The impact was immediate. Newspapers knocking at the door for interviews, curious neighbors coming by with bags of clothes, even old businessmen who never said good morning, now offering scholarships. What touched Gustavo most was hearing kids calling Lucas by name, not shouting, not cursing, but asking for help, advice, company. He had become a symbol, without even knowing. One night, Lucas pulled Gustavo aside, his voice trembling. "Do you think she's watching?" He looked up at the sky, trying to smile. Gustavo placed a hand lightly on the boy's head. "I'm sure of it." The whole city was talking. Some thought it was too much. Others got moved quietly. They'd never seen a millionaire give up his time and comfort to sit on a cold floor, listen to crying, teach a child to share bread. But in front of Lucas, nobody thought of numbers or business. It was just people, trying to do things differently. And for the first time, even silence felt full of hope. The rain had let up, but the wind still carried that sweet smell of wet grass and clean streets, as if to say everything was different here now. Cars pulled up slowly in front of the new building, all lit up with a huge banner over the door. Hope Institute. Everyone deserves a beginning. Gustavo stood off to the side of the hall, looking smaller, almost hidden among the flowers, struggling to hold back emotion. His expensive suit couldn't hide his restless hands, fidgeting, his quick breaths. He scanned the entrance, looking for one face among the crowd of well-dressed people, parents, kids, journalists, all the voices blending into a party's blur of laughter, camera clicks, whispered conversation. And then Lucas came in. There was no time to notice anything else. Gustavo's gaze found only the boy at the door, hair half-tamed with water, new shoes still shining as if just out of the box. Behind him, Amigo marched in too, lively, wagging his tail, ignoring everyone, as if only he and Lucas existed in that world. Lucas clutched a plain backpack, like a kid on his first day of school, but his eyes belonged to someone who'd carried much heavier burdens. He walked in slowly, holding on to that shy smile, and everyone stared. Some out of curiosity, others wondering what a street kid was doing here, dressed up like that, with a dog glued to his side. Gustavo's heart clenched. He saw the faces of the restaurant staff at the back, the same ones who almost sent Lucas away on that first night. Some couldn't help but smile, part moved, part in disbelief. One of them quickly wiped away a tear before the manager could spot it. When Lucas was called on stage, he stared at the floor, searching for courage at the tips of his new shoes. Gustavo walked over, placed a hand gently on his shoulder, slowly, so as not to startle him, and whispered, just for him, "You can do this. This is only the beginning, Lucas." Lucas climbed the steps, trembling a little. The microphone looked huge in his small hands, but he took a deep breath, looked at the audience, and then at Amigo waiting, tongue lolling, on the floor. His voice came out quiet but steady. "I just wanted to say thank you for not giving up on me, and for giving my friend a chance to." No one expected him to speak. The adults stopped whispering. A different kind of silence filled the room, the kind that aches from so many untold stories. Down below, Gustavo thought of Lucas's mother. Wondered what she'd say if she saw her son now, in the middle of all these people, not begging for bread from the trash anymore, but holding a scholarship in his hands. He pictured her smiling, crying with joy. And he too felt the urge to cry. The mayor took the microphone, said some nice words about hope, about the future, about how Lucas was a symbol of strength. But it was only when Gustavo joined Lucas on stage that the atmosphere truly changed. He took a deep breath, felt his voice waver, but went on. Wealth isn't in what we have, it's in what we're able to change. Seeing these invisible children, that's what changed me most. Hope grows stronger when we see a real smile. Today, that smile is Lucas's. Tomorrow, it might belong to many more. At the back of the room, many people wept quietly. Others clapped, some feeling sheepish. They'd never spared a thought for the kids who lived on the streets. An old man with white hair stood up, clapping loud, and soon everyone in the room was applauding on their feet. Lucas looked at Gustavo, eyes shining. In that instant, it seemed like he was teaching Gustavo how to see life in a whole new way. After the ceremony, Lucas received the scholarship, his name printed big, the date, a promise of a good school, uniform, and, believe it or not, even a tablet. He just stood there, looking at the paper for the longest time, like he was afraid to wake from a beautiful dream. Amigo hopped around, trying to grab the paper, thinking it was a game. Lucas burst out laughing and hugged his dog tight, as if giving thanks that he was no longer alone. In the middle of the party, a woman approached Lucas. She was a social worker, gentle-eyed, with a sincere smile. "You're coming home with us tonight. Your family's going to be a bit bigger now." Lucas looked over at Gustavo, a little scared, a little happy, and Gustavo just nodded, that calm smile of someone who's deeply proud. "Go on, Lucas. You deserve this. And you can visit any time you want. The Institute and my home are yours too, all right?" Late that night, as people stacked chairs and gathered up the colorful balloons, Gustavo stood by the window. Outside, the rain had started again, just a fine mist. Inside, a gentle weight pressed against his chest. It wasn't sadness but relief. The kind of relief only someone who's discovered a new purpose can feel. He watched Lucas walking away, hand in hand with his new mother, Amigo bouncing along beside them, fearless, unhurried. Gustavo thought about how such a small boy had changed everything, without even noticing, just by being kind, even when no one else was. Suddenly, money and business didn't seem as important as that single moment. Gustavo wiped his face, a little embarrassed to cry in front of others, but he couldn't hold back his smile. It really was a new beginning. For Lucas, for all the children who would yet find hope, and for Gustavo too. Because there, for the first time in years, he truly understood what it meant to be rich, to make someone smile, and mean it.